Hello and welcome to a kind of special, I was going to say summer edition, I'm getting ahead of myself, Easter edition of the Bull and Specs podcast. I'm Shane O'Connor, coming to you from Spain, and he's Adrian Lacey, stuck in Kent.
Yes. Well, I know who got the short straw here. Well, maybe your faux pas with the word summer wasn't so wide of the mark compared to what I'm enduring here. It's been tipping it down this afternoon. So, yes, envy.
I'll be honest with you, the mere mention of your name a little bit earlier and it started to rain here as well, so you have some mighty powers that I'm going to bow to. So.
And I've written a poem about it. It goes along the lines of the rain in Spain, but you probably know the rest.
Yeah, we're still our own fault for staying near the plains. That was the trouble. Now, we're up a mountain, actually. Beautiful setting in a place that nobody can pronounce in the entirety of the whole country. Benny de Lague, I think, is the best way. Well, that's how English people pronounce it when they're speaking English very loudly, which is how I do Spanish most of the time. But no, the view, you can see the view is absolutely stunning from the top of this. I think we're at the top of this mountain, although I do see places over the back which are a little bit higher than us. And always been the jealous type. I'm going to go around and brick their windows a little bit later on.
I was going to say they're probably paying a premium for being slightly higher up the mountain.
Well, do you know, it's funny actually, because one of the things you do when you go on holiday is stick them in Rightmove and find out exactly how much the property are going for.
Have you put a deposit down?
So yeah, no, they are. I can guarantee they are paying a premium. There's no question about that. They're not cheap in this area, I tell you, Adrian. But yeah, so well, we thought it'd be nice if we could do this. And funnily enough, actually, you're saying you drew the short straw, and we're due to be sometime in the summer in Kent. So who knows? Ooh. It could be a face-to-face episode one of these days soon. You never know.
Lummy.
But if you're not caught up with the podcast before, we kick some of the news stories around and give our interpretation and views. We've got a couple of crackers coming up for you, and also tell you what we've been up to this week. Do you want to go first, or?
Well, I know. I think you should. I mean, I don't know I'll be able to follow it, but yours has been the more exotic of the 2 weeks, I would have thought.
All right. Well, let me tell. I mean, it's always become a show and tell, hasn't it? Really, with us now. And I have in my hands a lovely pair of.
Please, Mrs.
Fruits. I have to say, I'm not really quite sure what these are. I'm ashamed to say we don't really know. We thought they might have been oranges, but But they smell absolutely divine. These things do. But I'm a bit frightened to open one to find out what's in there. So I'll be having those later after we finish the podcast. We're going to eat those. It's Easter, of course, which is a huge celebration in Spain, and they have. I'm going to have to look. Bear with me, bear with caller. I'm going to have to look this up because I just don't want to get this wrong. They have a whole week of celebrations, which in Spain translates to not going to work and lying down in a dark room, doesn't it? Their celebrations generally, which, you know, fair play to them for that. But they have a whole week, and then they have these processions, which are called Semana Santa. Have you heard of this at all? This
only not recently. No, I don't think so.
Well, I saw some pictures of what these things look like. And I said to my wife, they look like the Ku Klux Klan in these outfits. They wear like white robes.
Oh, I think I might have seen photos. Yeah, it's quite disturbing when you think of the associations we make with it. But
I mean, frighteningly close to it, isn't it? Really. And they are obviously, when every article you read, it says, and of course this has nothing to do with the. In fact, I've got it here. It says, although strikingly similar, they have nothing to do with the hoods worn by the Ku Klux Klan, but they are eerily and frighteningly similar to that. But this is all part of their religious ceremony. And we were out today, actually, Adrian, a little bit earlier on, and we drove through some of the towns and just noticed on the side of the road were chairs already laid out for these processions, which will take place over the weekend, over the Easter weekend. And they're already outside their businesses, I think, or outside their houses where they're actually onto the main street. They put all these chairs out and they'll sit there and watch all these processions. But it is a big, I think it is actually in Spain, Easter is the biggest celebration. It's the biggest holiday. They do this bigger than they do Christmas,
right,
or anything else. And the interesting thing is as well, I didn't realise this, but wherever you go in Spain has slight different variations on what they do and what they eat and how they celebrate and what the processions look like and what the music is like. For example, in the area where flamenco is quite prevalent, that plays a big part in the celebrations for this whole weekend. So we couldn't have timed it better, really, actually, to come up. But I've got to tell you this, just a quick one. We've just been out a little bit earlier on, and we were driving down the equivalent of a B road, I suppose you would call it in this country. You've got their A roads, or their motorways, their toll roads, and we were driving down this B road, and started to notice ladies sitting by the side of the road.
Aye, aye.
And we've come back and looked it up on the internet, and it turns out that roadside prostitution is a huge thing here. I mean, and they reckon that somewhere in the region of 40% of Spanish men have visited prostitutes at some time.
40%, that's massive.
It's huge, isn't it? We just couldn't believe it. But we thought, now, we're imagining this, and because these girls are obviously very overdressed, you know what I mean, when I say that, because I mean, it was sunny out, and they kind of got the leather boots on and all the rest of it. Although people do, it got so hot the other day, a Spaniard nearly took his parka off. They do kind of dress
snorkel
up for
parkas.
Yeah, they do. Back to snorkel parkas again. But they do. They feel the cold, I think, a bit more than we do. But yeah, we were driving and thinking, well, it can't be that. But yeah, sure enough, it was. Roadside prostitution is a thing in Spain. Who knew? Anyway, enough of my rubbing it in with the sitting in the sunshine, and the pool's just outside the door here. Actually, by the way, I didn't want to.
Oh, it's a hellish existence.
But it's just way too cold for me to go out in my shorts now. What about you? What have you been up to this week? And have you got a show and tell, more importantly?
Well, I have. I suppose I'm slightly behind the curve here. But had you heard that Katie Boyle died about a week or so ago?
Yes, yeah. So I didn't know she was the first host, amongst other things. I mean, I love Katie Boyle, but she was the first host of Eurovision, wasn't she?
Was she the very first? Oh, she certainly did it for years. Can you believe she did it as late as 1974? That's quite a reign. And reign's the word, actually. So, yeah, for the purposes of the younger audience, anyone under 80 or so, and she died at 91, so she had a good innings, to use a very well-worn cliche. But, every now and again, I thought about some ads she used to do on ITV, so TV ads back in the 70s, for a certain plastic compound that we now are thinking, well, it's probably not good to use too many plastics. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you remember the ads, Shane?
No, go on.
She, as I remember it, was the first to bring us into our lounges cling film. And
no,
yeah, that's, as I recall, I can't remember anyone else advertising it. And so if you don't remember that, you probably won't remember how she demonstrated it. But she put a very tight film of cling film over a bowl. Now, I'm not going to... Are you laughing too early before the punchline?
No, I'm just thinking, this is supposed to be show and tell. I'm just thinking, what's it? Has he got a Katie Boyle costume?
I have a plunging neckline, but enough about that.
Is he going to sing a song from Eurovision? Go on.
It's not quite that exotic. Now, part of me feels I should have had some cling film, but the other part of me thinks, no, this is the 21st century. Which, plastics in our oceans is a big theme at the moment. My story, well, actually, I'm going to mime the cling film. This is fascinating. And I should explain to people just listening on Spreaker or iHeartRadio or Stitcher or any other of those misspelt sound type podcatchers. We are in pictures, additionally, on YouTube. I have in my hands a piece of no, that was Neville Chamberlain. Wrong one. I have a small bowl which I'm holding up to the camera, and what Katie did, and I remember I'm miming the cling film. We can imagine it, can't we? In fact, if you're just listening without the pictures, you've got to imagine it. You haven't got any choice. Anyway, so she put this cling film over a bowl with clearly some liquid in it, probably soup, and she turned it upside down and held it over her head, rather in the manner I'm attempting to at the moment. It gets better. It gets better because you've got laces alternative to cling film. And anyway, better than that, she also... Now, this is where I really regret not having put some proper cling film on. She flicks her fingers against the film. And you as a musician who's played bass standing next to a certain musician a certain type of musician for too many years, as we were discussing just before we started recording. What sound would that make if you had a very taut film, cling film, on a bowl?
It'll go boom.
Yeah, something like that. A sort of snare drum type effect, but without the snare, but a sort of drum skin effect.
Yeah.
Now, people have already given up on me as any kind of sex god or someone other than the nerd I am. So it won't shock anyone who's a regular viewer to know that I've been worrying about what can I replace cling film with. This has kept me awake at night, and I think it's only fair. Oh, that was a nice little. Let me give you a. This is for our listeners. Oh, hang on. That's the bowl, anyway. So I've been lying awake, and particularly since poor Katie's died, thinking, in honour of her memory and to look after our seas, stick with this. This is deadly serious, as you know. I have come up with the replacement for cling film, which I needed for a risotto the other night. Risotto is a slightly grand term for bunging some rice in a bowl with some kidney beans. Anyway, so here is Lace's alternative to cling filming a bowl where you want to preserve the quality of your second-day-old risotto. And I put a device on top called, quite simply, a plate.
Wow, that is genius.
Well, we must have done it before cling film. We must have had... that's what kept me awake at night. I was trying to remember, what did we put on bowls before Katie brought us cling film? I think it was
do you know
plate.
the real problem with that is
What's
that what do you do if it's on a plate? Because it doesn't seem right putting two plates together, then, do you? Do you then have to put the bowl on the top?
Oh! I'm going to have to road test that one. Back to the drawing board.
You're listening to the Bull and Specs podcast with Shane O'Connor and Adrian Lacey. You asked me, actually, quite rightly, I never even gave this a thought because you knew I was going to be away in Spain, Adrian. You said to me, why don't you try and find a story from Spain? And I thought, what a brilliant idea. And it was really easy to do, actually. I've been onto a few websites of the Spanish newspapers, which they produce in English, presumably, I'm guessing, for people who live out here and want to catch up with the latest news, but are not sufficiently interested that they bother to learn the language.
As they're eating their fat boys' breakfasts.
Yeah, that's it. What do you call them? Lazy news hounds, who kind of thinking, well, I wonder what's happening in the world. But I came across this story. Now, this one really stuck. There's a lot of stuff, funnily enough, about Brexit and whether that's to do with the expat community or whether that's to do with the fact that, as I think as you pointed out, Gibraltar is probably an issue when it comes to Brexit with the Spanish. There was a lot of stuff about that. There was a lot of stuff about the Catalan situation and the pending extraditions and all that. But I found this story about a rapper, a guy who's a rap artist from Mallorca. He's been jailed for 3.5 years after he criticised the Spanish royal family. I was absolutely gobsmacked by this story. Although he was also charged with glorification of terrorism and slander as well, defamation against the crown, I think, is their law that they have over here. But this fella, Josep Miquel Arenas Beltrán, I hope I pronounced that right, but his stage name is Valtonyc with a Y, has got 3.5 years in prison because of the content of some of these song lyrics. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, what happened to free speech, particularly in art? He's only 24 years old, and I suppose when you're that age, you kind of want to be pushing the edge of your art and being as controversial and as noticed as you possibly can. But he seems he got noticed by all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. I sent you this story. Did it shock you when you saw this guy?
Oh yeah. When you think we're talking about an EU country and Western Europe, and we like to think there is something we call free speech. I mean, obviously, Spain has a history of Franco only died in 1974. I say only for younger viewers, that of course is prehistory, but I wonder if there's something left in the culture there that makes this sort of thing more likely. I don't know, that may be itself defamation. I'll probably get put away for it, but I mean, it just it sounds very, very heavy-handed, and most likely, particularly in this age of social media, completely counterproductive, because you get a whole generation of young people, I would suspect, even if they'd never heard of him before. It's just the sort of thing that takes off on Twitter, isn't it? And sort of generates a backlash. But it is very disturbing that a country that's so close to us and close to us culturally, and as you're demonstrating, we go on holiday there. We enjoy their food and other elements of the culture and so on, and yet this is going on.
The interesting thing, and what really surprised me, because you can't, and you're right, you're saying, he's a youngster, and it's almost like the new generation against the old guard, and whether there are traditions in place and all the rest of it. But reading the article, the mayor of Barcelona, who has come out and expressed solidarity with the rapper. Did you see this on Twitter? The mayor of Barcelona said, "Sad and dark times when you have to fight for something so obvious as rapping is not a crime. Singing about Bourbon thieves is freedom of expression." And so part of the establishment is obviously quite torn about this, really.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's any subtext here about Catalonian, the story about independence at the moment and the drive for that. Does it suit their cause for the mayor of Barcelona to take a different line to the national central government that really they don't want to recognise? Ultimately, there's probably more to it than meets the eye, isn't there?
Well, I didn't realise this isn't the first time this has happened. Previously, another rapper had been sentenced to 2 years in prison by a Spanish national court. But this was over what they described as glorification of terrorism. This was all to do with the Basque conflict, which is another division, another rupture within the Spanish infrastructure and framework, as it were. They'd written a song about Basque freedom fighters and said, "No, that's glorification of terrorism. 2 years for you, mate. There you go, off you go." So this has happened before. And I guess it's probably going to happen again as well, isn't it? And do you think this is something in the UK? I could never see this happening in the UK, that if you criticise the royal family, I mean, there'd be an awful lot of comedians out of business, wouldn't there? Although it's not as popular as it once was.
Well, the royal family,
yeah, like
comedy.
It's a dying art, isn't it? Comedy.
Your comedy is going out of style.
The idea of using the royal family as I mean, it wasn't, like you say, in our day, it was Princess Anne and Prince Charles, and they were prime targets for the comedians of the day. But that doesn't seem to be the case so much now. The new royals don't seem to figure in people's psyche as much, do they? Do you think? I don't know.
I've got the feeling that the younger comedians don't think there's much capital in it. With William and Harry, William and Kate, and so on. I'm not sure that it's something that they would want to kick against particularly hard. But there's something I want to say about freedom of expression, which is, it's not really controversial. It's just it's doing what Basil Fawlty would call stating the bleeding obvious, in a way, which is that we don't actually have freedom of expression. There are two limits to it, and I'm not saying I disagree with them, but when we sort of bandy about that term, I know it's kind of a shorthand that we're obliged to use, but the reality is there's something called defamation and laws of libel. You and I have had to do our homework on that, being steam radio broadcasters in the past, and who knows, in the future. But of course it applies to people podcasting. I'm sure there's lots of people not quite sure where the line is on that, or as a friend of mine said, not even aware there is a line. But yes, you can't just lay into someone without any evidence, or in a lot of cases, if they've got a better lawyer than you, or deeper pockets, then even if you're right about what you say about someone that's defaming them, they can still win in court. So there's that. There's also, and again, I think our libel law's a bit too fierce, but that's a whole complex thing for a whole other show, I guess. But the other thing is incitement to racial hatred. Again, to make it absolutely clear, I'm not arguing for the right to incite to racial hatred, but that's a curtailment in the UK of freedom of expression. So I just think all these things are more complicated. And two more things, if I'm allowed, very quickly, two more points. One is that, did you know that it's convention? By convention, you can't criticise the royals in the Houses of Parliament. So you can't raise a debate saying, should we have a queen at all? because of the, I'm sure there will be constitutional experts who will know, chapter and verse of this, but essentially it's a historical thing about that you're in Parliament by, what's the phrase? Almost not by permission of the royal.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a similar phrase to Her Majesty's pleasure, isn't it? That kind of thing.
Something like that.
At the discretion of Her Majesty or something of that nature.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And you can't. It's very hard to criticise the royals on the BBC, your favourite broadcaster. Certainly on the news side of things, you have to sort of bow and scrape. And I think that possibly dates from the BBC only existing by virtue of a royal charter, so you don't bite the hand that feeds.
Although Nicholas Witchell did try and push the boundaries on that particular remit, didn't he, really? I mean, he was caught criticising them.
Was that the recording off air?
Yeah, I remember the hoo-ha about that was huge, wasn't it, at the time? And like you look back now and you think, well, I don't really, you kind of think it's quite innocuous, really, by comparison nowadays. But the other thing I was going to say about freedom of speech as well, I mean, there's this guy who's has he been jailed, the guy who got his dog to do the Hitler salute, the YouTube comedian? Have you seen this story?
Sorry, I have heard of it. It's quite ridiculous, isn't it?
I mean, you can't.
Surely, if you're going to jail anyone, it would be the dog.
Exactly. You can't believe that these kind of things are happening nowadays. And you'll tell me who this was. Who was it that said, "Sir, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it."
I know that I don't know the specific person, but that's a liberal position, famously, isn't it?
But a pretty decent position as well. And I know it's difficult when I hear people saying, who we deem as terrorists, are saying things that you find difficult to stomach. It is difficult to take a contrary position, which you feel threatens your very existence. But in order to have a democratic freedom of speech, you have to allow that, don't you? You have to say. That within parameters you are allowed to say certain things. I think we had this conversation last week off air, didn't we? And I said, I think we only need a solicitor with a bit about them who wants to make a name for themselves, who thinks, right, I'm going to take on some high-profile Twitter cases and start suing people. And I think Twitter would be a very deserted area overnight. But in this particular case, when you're producing art, whether you think rap music is art or not, I suppose is an entirely different podcast or another subject for another day. If you're producing art, you have to, don't you? You have to have that ability to be able to have that freedom, surely.
Well, I think so, and otherwise it's like pulling the teeth out of it. I mean, rap's roots are in I nearly came up with the word grime, which itself is another area that I would not profess to know about, but a sort of related artistic area. But its very roots are in a kind of complaint from the underdog, to come back to your favourite animal.
Yeah. It doesn't come out the school of Burt Bacharach, does it? There's no question.
Let's just say I'm not aware of too many rap acts in Kensington and Chelsea.
Yes, yeah. Let's just say our rap career it's going to be on hold, I think, isn't it? We were going to make the record that was going to be announced in the next episode of Bull and Specs. In fact, those are our rap names, aren't they? Bull and Specs.
Which one's which? So this is Bull and Specs with the Stadler and Wardorf of podcasting land. Don't know which is which.
I don't know which one are you. I know which one I am.
Did you think that was any good? I thought it was rubbish. Yes, a pair of Muppets podcasting every week on Bull and Specs. But enough about us. What I want to say now, 2 words, well, hyphenated. Tampered balls.
Yeah.
Or ball tampering, whichever way round you want it. Stop it. You and your fruits.
Oh.
It has been discussed constantly in the past few days, or certainly I have been unable to avoid it on the news. You'll be up to speed on this, even out in Spain, I'm sure. Australia's Steve Smith and Cameron Bangers Bancroft. Do you love the way they do that to each other, cricketers and cricket commentators? You'd be, what would you be? Shaners or...
Yeah, I'd be Ockers.
Connors. Doesn't work with Connor.
Yeah.
Ockers. I'd be lace-ups.
Tuffers.
Anyway.
This is the other one, isn't it? Phil Tufnell, Tuffers.
Oh, right, yeah. And so it goes. That all sounds very public school to me, but that's how I associate cricket anyway, because I was at such an impoverished school, we didn't have cricket. or almost none whatsoever.
We had a bat at our school. We had a cricket bat, but we only had a beach ball. So
I thought you were going to say that's for the maths teacher to discipline you.
yeah.
I'm not saying it was a hard school.
Oh man, I tell you. No, we used to. You never played cricket at school?
I can remember one occasion being in the nets. But only one occasion. It wasn't standard fare. No. Anyway, I must finish this.
Yeah,
sentence.
sorry. Yeah. Go on. Carry on with your
No.
sentences,
Happy to take questions. I was going to say field questions for a moment. Hey, Australia's Steve Smith and Cameron Bangers Bancroft admitted to a premeditated plan to tamper with the cricket ball during the third test against South Africa. Yes. Now, if it's not immediately obvious, sport is not my strong suit, but I have at least done a little bit of research on this. Essentially, it turns out you can alter the angle of the ball, presumably to throw the guy in front of the wicket. What's he called?
Batsman.
The batter. Is that the batsman?
Yeah.
I said batter.
Well, you could have said the Battist.
The Battist. Yes, the bat person.
The Batman.
We mustn't be. And Robin's doing the bowling. Anyway, essentially, you can confuse the batsman or batswoman by tampering with the ball, or there can be legitimate, fair wear and tear on the ball. On one side rather than the other will cause a sort of the swing direction to be less predictable.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summation?
That's a pretty blooming good summation. That is. I mean, I have to say, the one report I read, which said they're referring to it as sandpaper gate. And
that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
I'll explain why in a second. But that is absolutely bang on. You have a seam on a cricket ball. And if you can change the seam, or you can pick at the seam, or whatever, in this particular case, sandpaper the seam. I'll tell you how I did it in a minute. You can make the ball unpredictable. You can make it change direction as it hits the ground in front of the batsman. It'll fly up or turn or whatever, and all the rest of it. Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. Although I got to say, I'm not a big cricket fan either, really. But this is nothing new, Adrian. I mean, there was all kinds. And they used to. One of the favourite ones, they'd either pick at the seam. Have you ever heard that? Where they'd be the bowler, because it's very difficult to tell they're doing that, because they'd have the ball down by their groin. Ooh, matron.
Yeah. Stop it.
And this is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? It's this story.
3 balls are better than 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they'd hold it in their groin, kind of thing, as they were walking back away from the wicket to take a run up, and they'd be just picking at the seam with it. So they'd grow a big thumbnail, and they'd be picking at the seam, kind of thing, to do exactly the same sort of thing. There was one. And I think he was a South African, actually. If this was back in the 1980s, was caught biting the seam. He actually put the ball in his mouth and took a big chunk out of it and gave it back to the bowler. One of the fielders did.
What's he doing with teeth in his groin, though?
It was.
Can't work that out.
That was a hell of a beating he took that day, I tell you. But but this particular sandpaper gate is because he was using tape, wasn't he? He was using tape. He was getting bits of grit off the floor. And he was using this particularly sticky tape that they use to tape up their pads, and he was putting it. So he's making his own sandpaper and then doing it to the ball. But of course, I mean, you know what the cameras are like. You know what the lenses are like. I mean, you've worked in TV on sporting events. You know that they can. If a gnat farts over on the other side of a cricket pitch, they'll pick it up, won't they? They'll see it. Somebody will catch it.
Yeah. Well, apparently they're now up to 30 cameras at these top cricket matches. Yeah, you can't get much past 30 cameras, can you?
I mean, I don't know how they ever think they're going to kind of get away with it. But, I mean, I sent a note to you earlier when we knew we were going to do this story. I said, I haven't seen this much crying around cricket since I was made to do it at school. It's just... I'm really shocked by all... I'm shocked that people are shocked, first of all. I'm shocked that the Australians are all in tears, because you know what they're like. I mean, they're quite a macho nation, aren't they, the Australians? And I'm kind of shocked that they didn't think that they would get caught and this wouldn't end the way that it. The whole thing I find really quite shocking, but not for the actual acts of ball tampering, which, as I say, is nothing new in cricket. And in fact, cricket itself. I mean, if go back to the Bodyline tour and. When they were bowling balls at the player rather than trying to play cricket. I mean, all of that kind of stuff. It's always been they've always been tried to. Here, I've got another cricketing pun for you. They've always been trying to push the boundaries.
Very good, very good. What surprised me, I have to say, and this is a measure of how low I set the bar these days in public life, I was surprised they fessed up so quickly. I mean, I know you're going to say it's on camera, but I was surprised the captain took responsibility. That if there's any shaft of light in this, I actually think, I mean, people might think it's slightly odd of me to say it, but I think there's some hope there in that he took responsibility and didn't just pass it down the line to the bloke with his gritty tape, if I can call it that.
I think you're absolutely right. And do you know what? With sport as well, the fact that they owned up to it, I'm always minded of those images and those press conferences with Lance Armstrong where he lied and lied and lied. I mean, just like barefaced lied. Took the mickey out of was it David Walsh, the journalist who pursued
was on his case for years, wasn't he? Yeah.
Fabulous journalist. And I remember other journalists laughing at David Walsh because he took the mickey out. And I just thought, these are your colleagues, mate. Why are they? This is disgraceful, But when you see somebody who can lie like that, nothing is you think, well, they'll just go in and go, well, we didn't do it, and they'll say, well, there's the you say, yeah, but we didn't do it, and you're right. I think you nail on the head there. I think for them to admit it in the first place is pretty rare.
And then of course there was the comedy payoff where the guy realises he's been spotted and attempts to hide the tape down his undercrackers, doesn't he? What did that do to the other type of balls, if we may say? I mean, sandpaper down there,
He still hasn't got it off, apparently. I think it's been on for a few days.
Maybe he wasn't crying. It's just, his eyes were watering with the sensation going on as he moved.
That's it. While he was giving the press conference, one of his colleagues was trying to prize it away. But was doing it slowly, and he's going,
that's a bit like hair remover, isn't it?
Oh dear, the waxing thing. The worst enemy. It'll be interesting to see because I mean, obviously, it's a much bigger sport in Oz than it is in the UK. I mean, it's quite big in the UK, isn't it? Really, cricket is reasonably popular, but in Australia, it is behind Australian rules football. I think it's number 2, is it, or is it number 1? I can't remember, but it's certainly.
I would guess number 1.
It's a big deal, isn't it?
Certainly up there.
It's a big deal, and
it's part of the national self-definition. It's no less than that, is it? Or certainly for blokes and for cricket fans. I mean, the Prime Minister's weighed in, hasn't he, having to go at these guys?
Do you think they should resign? I mean, do you think they should go? I mean, if you get caught cheating. Is that it? Is that the end of your career now? I mean, I look at there's still a claim that there's still drugs heavily involved in cycling, and I kind of think, how can you take that seriously as a sport? Athletics, there are claims regularly that in world athletics that there are drugs. How can you take that seriously? And you think, if they got caught cheating, that was a one-off incident. Should they face a ban for a period of time and then should be allowed to continue? I mean, how seriously do you take it? Is that the biggest sin in sport, that you cheat?
Well, they're obviously not the first and obviously not the last, but I would have thought a season suspension would have to be something serious like that. When I heard he was just being docked. Was it that day's pay or for that tournament? I thought that's not going to be enough to satisfy the public, the cricket-loving public.
No, and whether that is all. I mean, because it's one thing you can say, okay, well, for that's your punishment for that, and we're gonna take that off you. Whether he ever gets selected again is quite another matter, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's like because the peer pressure or the pressure from the public or the pressure from the media means that selection is not an option.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to trust him again, isn't it? But if he shows some contrition and stays away from the top level professional end of the sport for to have to be a decent period of time.
Yeah.
Then there might be some rehabilitation. And he might have to do, I mean, I know it's a bit of a media-type cliche, media-friendly cliche, but, some work with charity or something, or I don't know, invent a new lie detector test or something.
Just work in a sandpaper factory for a fortnight or something like that, maybe, I don't know.
And put it all down his trousers, yeah.
I must admit, I was lucky enough to, as one of my life experiences, I was lucky enough to face a professional cricketer, county cricketer, Dominic Cork. I don't know if did he ever make the England team? I can't remember whether he did or not. But he bowled a couple of balls. I mean, I think I had an over, I had 6 balls bowled at me by him. For the radio, this was. And it was like being shot at.
Lots of good sound effects, I'm sure.
Because that's all you can't see it. You've got a helmet on and you can't see it, and all it could do is and you look around and goes, he's walking back, he must have bowled it. He's like, you couldn't see it. So I mean, hats off to those guys. They are pretty amazing. I'm always minded of Jasper Carrott though. As said, because he didn't know anything about cricket and he had to go and play in a charity cricket match, and they gave him all the pads and everything, and he gave him a triangular thing, and he said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, it's a box." And he said, "Oh, right, okay." He said, I didn't know what to do with it. He said, "So I put it on my face over my nose." He says, and I'm thinking as I walked out, I'm thinking, God, I don't know where the last bloke had this.
Oh, please. And on that super high cultural note, we must draw things to a close.
I always managed to drag it down, and it doesn't matter where we are.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you can be on the highest high of the mountain in Spain, and still reduces to the lowest low. You can take the kid out of the West Midlands.
But yeah, you can never take the West Midlands out of the kid. Yeah, listen, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Bull and Specs podcast, thanks for being with us. We really do appreciate your patronage. And if you enjoy it and you like what you're seeing or hearing or both, then please spread the word, because it will help us immensely if you can subscribe and also pass it on and say, hey, have you heard this podcast? We quite like it. You might like it as well. You can get the audio through Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, still for another week, although pending court cases, and iTunes. But that's a story that keeps going on and on. We must cover that one of the weeks. And you can get the videos as well, can't you, Adrian? You can see the pictures with all their glory.
Yes, just lead your mouse sashaying along to the YouTube and search for Bull and Specs. And famously, the "and" is not the word spelt out, but the ampersand, which you will find above the number 7 on your QWERTY, if not quirky, keyboard. So that's Bull and Specs with the ampersand sign, and you should find us and subscribe to Shane. You've got a channel of your own, haven't you? So important are you in the cybersphere. There is a Shane O'Connor channel, especially at YouTube.
Yeah, although, having said that, it's not that I'm important, I've got a lot of time on my hands, I think that's what that is. But yeah, it's got a playlist. So we very often, if you go to Twitter, Shane on Air, or Adrian Lacey 01 is your Twitter handle, isn't it?
01, yeah.
01, yeah. If you go to those, when we tweet them out, normally the link that we send out, you can see the whole library of stuff. So you can go to past episodes as well, which we like to think people will be able to go back and have a listen to, and hopefully will be timeless. But yeah, lots of great ways you can see and hear as well. Till the meantime, we've got to make some kind of ball tampering reference, haven't we, before we sign off?
and some kind of Spanish tie-in, if you could arrange that.
Well, I was just going to say, until next time, I'll have eaten both of these.
Oh, matron. And I'm going to put a plate on my head instead of cling film. That doesn't work, does it?